I'm here with Matt Stines, who's the superintendent of the Grant 110 School District. And thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I know we're right in the middle of the Triple I conference in Chicago. And the last 3 days we've covered a whole variety of topics. One of the topics that, really needs somebody that's been through that process is financially troubled school districts. Now, you've been through that.
Just a little bit.
We've
had some money issues.
And you've come out the other side.
Thank God we came out the other side. Absolutely.
So you have some real scar tissues and experience to share. I thought with everybody, what are the major causes of a financially distressed district? What happens?
Well, school funding's kind of a different animal to begin with. So you've got local funding, you've got state funding, you've got federal funding, and anytime one of the three fall off, it can cause you to fall into some financial problems. For my district, what we found, and it went on for decades prior to me getting there, is that we didn't generate enough local funding to make up the gap. And what we got into is this consistent cycle that we had to borrow money from working cash and sell bonds, loan it to the ed fund, and then we were just in this process about every 3, 4, 5 years.
Sure.
But then we hit 2008 and the market dropped out on local property values. The housing market really took a turn. And all of a sudden, we were just really in trouble. And we were forecasting to where we were going to run out of money in a couple years. And we hit a point where we knew we had to have an increase in our tax rate. It was 2009 was when we did that, the first referendum. It hadn't had an increase since 1985. So it was like 25 years.
Wow.
So it was long overdue. And we got into the process where it took us 3 attempts at it. It was a long, arduous period of time because when the first one didn't pass, then we had to go in and make cuts. At one point, I cut 20% of my budget.
My goodness. How'd you do that, staff?
It's predominantly staff.
Yeah.
Any of the additional programs that you have, art, music, any of the fun stuff, class sizes jumped. We went from like 15 in a class at kindergarten up to like 22.
Oh my goodness.
It really it got hard, and it impacted families. Not only the ones that worked for us, but also the ones that sent their kids to us. It was a tough deal.
Wow.
But what I learned is that when we didn't pass the first and second referendum, and we said we were going to cut, biggest lesson learned is you have to follow through.
You have to do it.
Yeah. And once we did, the community realized it really is as bad as they say. One of the things that we ran into, though, even though we talked about cutting programs, I don't think that had the impact to get the community behind us as much as the promise, the guarantee that if we didn't pass it a third time, we would close the school. And that really was the brink of where we were at, that if we didn't get the additional revenue, we were going to close the school district.
Now, did these statements that you throw out there, are they taken as threats?
They were. Especially the one about closing the school.
Oh, I bet.
Because there's actually 5 districts that surround us, and a couple very good districts, one that maybe isn't as good a district, and a lot of my community looked at that as a scare tactic to try and get them to pass the referendum, and I didn't use it as a scare tactic, but on the other side, I told the truth, and I was very upfront about this really could happen. And why would you take the risk of that happening? So, they viewed it as a threat. But, it really wasn't a threat. It was reality that if we didn't have the funding, you're going to lose programs or you're going to lose your school, and that's just what has to happen.
Yeah, well, what I've seen is the messenger is the one that gets shot.
I've got a few bullet holes back here,
And as you said, it started years before you became superintendent there.
It did.
And you just called light to it, attention.
Yeah. We were deficit spending for almost 2 decades, and I walked in with, we were probably an $8 million budget, and we were borrowing about $1.5 million of that. So, run the numbers, 25% of my budget was borrowed money, and that's just the situation I was dealt. And
so basically, you got the short end of the rope.
I wouldn't even say that, Dennis. It was nobody got the short end of the rope. it was just the reality of how the district had survived, and it was coming to a critical mass.
I see.
just happened to be the guy that was there.
You were there.
when things blew up on us.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
no fault to anybody prior to
Yeah.
me.
So how do you work with the school board? Because they're voted in by the people, and you're hired by them.
Right.
Is it, well, maybe there's someone else who'll have a better idea or a different answer? How did you convince them that, hey, you went through the options, you've laid it out there for them, they had a chance to look at it from a variety of different viewpoints, and what you're sharing is truthful. It is what it is.
It was. I was blessed to have a very good school board. Very supportive. Out of the 7, I would say 5 of them had been on the board a long time. So they understood where we'd been and the borrowing process, and they understood when we hit this kind of critical mass where things had to change. We were actually here in Chicago when things kind of hit the fan. So the board president, I upgraded her room to a suite so that we had a place to meet. And so
There you go.
Well,
that's a technique I've not heard.
well, I'll tell you what, we hunkered down because the election was prior to us getting here, and we knew that if the election didn't go our way, we would have to make some really tough decisions. So when the first referendum didn't pass and we started lining out cuts, I had given them some options, and then when it didn't pass, I just got us a room, and we sat down. I ordered pizza in, and we sat around in the suite all Saturday night and just talked about what are our options.
Yeah.
And had one of the big sticky note poster boards,
No
and we just
kidding.
started sticking them around the room. And it's like, okay, we can cut this, this, and this, and save this, or do we cut this to save this? And you just go through the options. And by the time we drove back Sunday, we had I'll never say it's a good plan,
Yeah.
but we had a plan,
plan.
for how we would address that 20%
Yeah.
reduction in the budget,
Yeah.
and everybody was on board, and it was scary. I think everybody knew if the vote was no, we would have to do some hard things, but actually doing the hard things was
Right.
really tough.
Right.
It took an emotional toll on a lot of people.
Oh, I bet it did.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was hard. I'll tell you, one of the worst days is when you have to sit with a single mom and tell her that she no longer has a job because I don't have it in my budget to keep the additional 4th grade teacher.
Wow.
That's hard.
That's really tough. Well, I've sat in on a variety of seminars about this topic, but never shared from a frontline perspective that you've had, like talking to the single mom who's a teacher to let them go. So you came out of it in good shape. The district's back on track.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
It did. Third time's a charm. The vote spread was great. So we lost probably 75%, 25% the first time. Just didn't get any traction.
They didn't believe you, right?
No. So then we had to come in and make some cuts. And then the second vote, we lost by something, just one of these votes that you just hate to see. I think we lost by 21 votes. It just killed me.
Yeah.
But then the third time we won by that quarter margin. It was 75% in our favor.
So how long was that time span between the first vote to the third? Because you're on borrowed time,
You are.
and I guess they saw teachers being let go,
They did.
so they saw the end coming.
Yeah, so it was 2009, and then we passed it in 2014. So it was a 5-year time span. People saw a lot of blood. There was actually a point in August where my bookkeeper and I were talking about things, and we hadn't seen the tax money come in yet. And she looked at me and she said, Matt, we only have $1,200 in our general checking account. How do you want to handle that? I'm like, well, there's not much we can do except not pay the bills. Just, hold everything until the tax dollars show up.
Yeah.
But we were in really dire financial straits. It's a tough place.
Well, I want to congratulate you. What would be 2 or 3 things that you would share with someone that has been struggling for a time, head still above water, but they need to see the option of what happens if you can't keep treading the water? What do you do?
I think the most important thing is you have to prioritize what's most important.
Prioritize
And
number one.
Absolutely. And cutting 20% of our budget was tough, but as we did that, it was always a focus on what's the essential for kids. You know, nobody wanted to give up band, but
Right.
it's band essential. So
Right.
you kind of had to make those choices. So priorities are most important. Number two, I would say, is follow through, especially when you're interacting with the community, like on a referendum. If you tell them this is going to be the outcome based on a vote, you better follow through. Otherwise, you lose all your credibility,
Right.
and you don't have any ability to move forward.